Okay, welcome everyone. We'll give it a moment or two. I see some names that I recognize. If you can just put the state or the city and state, if you feel like, into the chat box so we know where people are coming from. We know we have some international attendees who have signed up, so that's really fun. Particularly, we have a group coming from Brazil. Yay! So Jacksonville, Florida. Yep, my former stomping grounds. We have some other group people here. So if you can, just put where you're from. I'm from Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia. We're actually Crozet. How about you, Michelle? You got Harrisburg?
I'm here in Denver, Colorado today.
Denver, Colorado. Yep, I've got grandkids there. Cindy?
Cleveland, Ohio, the North Coast of America.
Oh, yes. I grew up, that's what they called it, the North Coast of America. That's right. And so we have Harrisburg, Trussville. I don't know where Trussville is. I mean, Alabama, but I don't really know the state of Alabama that well. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and get started. And what I'd like to do is introduce Michelle and Cindy and myself. Michelle Stowe is the former COO of Mercy Housing, and when she starts to speak, she can just give a little bit more. And she retired into recently her other company called Skyrocket Coaching, and she's become a friend of ours, and we collaborate together on projects. And so she has been working with the future of work and doing executive coaching with folks, as well as our organization. And then Cynthia Medaglia, she is my business partner, and she retired into this company, Linceis Conscious Business. And it only took me at least 10 or 15 years to get her to join the firm. And so she joined the firm as an owner. And she too has been working with leaders and teams, doing some executive coaching, as well as the question that's on everybody's mind, the future of work. And what do we do? You know, I've been sitting in rooms with senior leaders saying, what do we do? And then I've been sitting with leaders that are saying, what do I do? And so that we're going to attempt in 45 minutes to address some of those particular issues. The return to office, you know, when I first started hearing back to work, I thought that's an odd thing to say, because none of us, if you weren't laid off, none of us stopped working. So returning to work or back to work, back to the office, yes, is as we begin to understand COVID more, you know, more 14, 15 months later, where we're seeing more vaccinations, you know, a lot of employers are quite anxious to have people come back to work, and sometimes even full-time. Other employers are wrestling. Should we be full-time? Certainly, when you look at all of the information that's out there, not everybody wants to come back to the office full-time. They rather like the balance that they've gotten, even though some people say, well, it was a little bit more stressful because I was homeschooling my kids, and, you know, everything was blending over each other. And then the dog comes in on your Zoom call, and then your child wants to come in because they're hungry, and all of those things. But, you know, I've noticed, and I know Cindy's noticed, I'm sure Michelle has, there's a lot more compassion for those sorts of things since we all were in that together. Some organizations are already providing dates. You will be back to work by X date. Some June 1, July 1, September 1, November 1. Some are allowing their employees to give feedback into that, what would work well for them. And others are being just, you know, sort of cut and dry and saying, nope, everyone's coming back. Nobody gets a choice on this one. And so what's the real right answer? Some organizations that are saying we will have you back by X date are already starting to lose employees who say, no, not for me anymore. Because, you know, unlike when I grew up, I actually felt like I never had a choice. You know, you just got a job and you went to the office. And now, first millennials were the ones pushing that they wanted more remote work, more work-life balance. But then all of us last year on a global basis got tossed into a work from home situation, which opened, you know, a lot of our eyes going, maybe this isn't so bad. And, you know, as Cindy and I have done team sessions together, and I'm sure Michelle has run into this too, we've heard people say, we like working from home. We miss coming in, wouldn't mind having something more hybrid, but I'm not ready to come back 100%. And we actually have heard a lot more of that from some of our executive clients that we've been doing one-on-one coaching. So as companies try and figure out their future to work strategy, employees are asking, depending on the strategy, do I stay or do I go, depending on what they do? And so a couple of things. If you have any comments or questions, please put them in the chat. Cindy will be monitoring that. And then if you are looking for any executive coaching for some of the folks that are struggling with these kinds of questions or executive coaching in general, or if you need some help with trying to figure out the strategy around your back to work or back to bad, said that wrong. The future of work, back to the office strategy, we are certainly working on that as well. But Cindy's got a few other statistics that we've gathered, and I'll let her take it from there.
So hi, everyone, and welcome to Real Talk. The interesting statistic I want to share with you was completed by PricewaterhouseCoopers. They conducted a survey regarding United States remote work. And what was the attitude around remote work? 133 executives were surveyed and 1,200 employees. And there were three top findings. The first one was remote work is proving to be productive and improved compared to where we first started when COVID first hit. The second finding is that employees are ready to call everyone back. You're already, some folks are coming back as soon as June 1st. Some may already be back. Others are saying, okay, come September 1st. It depends on the industry. It depends on the boss as to how quickly they're trying to get everyone back into their office. And the employees, that second finding is that employers like, everybody come back, let's go. And the employees are saying, like Sue had said earlier, hey, not so fast. Wait a second. I've been productive for the last year and a half. Why can't I continue to work from home? Why can't I continue to be effective here? And I think it's just because, employers, they have a comfort zone of the way we used to do things. But it's a whole new world now. and our employees, it's not an entitlement, it's a work-life balance. The third finding is hybrid is most likely going to become the norm. Whether it's 4 days in the office, 1 day at home, maybe it's 3 days office, 2 days home, trying to come up with some type of compromise so that the employees can feel like they still can balance this work-life situation better than it was before COVID. So with that, I would like to ask a few questions, and I'm going to start with you, Michelle. As a former COO of Mercy Housing, and now you're CEO of the Skyrocket Consulting, what are the main concerns of your corporate clients as they consider bringing people back full-time to the office?
It's a long list.
Okay.
It's an excellent question, Cindy, because the considerations of, we look at what's happened in 2020 and 2021, they're considering everything from the health, the physical well-being of their employees around masking and vaccine protocols, testing protocols. They're looking at, do we have alignment among our senior team? Are we all in agreement of what we think we ought to be doing? They're looking at what culture did we have before all of this changed, and what can it or should it be going forward? They're looking at turnover, right? To your point, Cindy, employees making the decision, no, I'm pretty happy right here, and I think I can find another job that allows me to do this. And they're also looking at equity. For a lot of employers, they have a mix of staff, from those who, through this whole pandemic, have needed to still commute to a location, whether it's manufacturing or healthcare or housing. And how do you balance the equity of what you've been asking that workforce to do with the workforce that has had the opportunity to work remotely? And how does that change? So it is a long list of questions, and it's all coming at them pretty fast, right? This has been a challenging year, And now the what do we do now comes on top of just a ton of exhaustion.
Yes, yes. Sue, I know that being the CEO of Linceis Conscious Business, um, you're working with several different clients in several different sectors as well. And I'm going to pose the same question to you. What are some of these leaders, your corporate clients, what are they bumping up against as they're considering bringing people back on a full-time basis?
Thanks, Cindy. Yeah, one of the things that, and you're seeing this in some of the studies that are being done, or even the surveys being done that CEOs and senior teams are concerned about, is what about the culture? And how do we have a culture if you're not living in the culture? And that's their number one reason. But like, what Michelle said was, well, what was your culture before? And what did that actually mean? And so when you say, what about the culture, what aspect of the culture are you talking about? Probably teamwork, probably inclusion, probably the sense of belonging. Maybe there's even this concern, and I was just in a meeting last week where, well, are we really getting the productivity that we thought we were getting? Yet, as Cindy, you mentioned, people, we have had productive workforces, in general. And so, and the other question that one of the organizations that I recently spoke with was also then talking about, well, then how does, if we allow a hybrid or people to stay at home, how does diversity, equity, and inclusion then get impacted? Because I actually heard one CEO say that, well, if they're not here, they're not going to be considered. And so that now you're talking about access, right? Access to, as well as then the other questions that they've been asking, which is about health and what's our liability if we bring people back. And I know we're going to talk about like the individual questions, so I'll hold on that. But one of the things, and I know Michelle, so I'll stop here, but one of the things Michelle's going to talk about is when it comes to culture, the primary thing I keep hearing about is the drive-bys and the pop-ins have been lost. And what an important aspect of culture that is. And so the only answer that they keep coming to is everybody come back.
Again, getting back to that comfort zone. We've done it this way since the beginning of time. And we were forced into adjusting out of pure necessity. But now that, everyone somewhat feels like we've got this COVID thing under control, now it's no longer a necessity to have people at home. Now we want to go back to the way it was, because that model worked for us for all those years, but yet this most recent model also worked. And so it's going to be interesting to see where the compassion lies, what the justification is for these leaders as to how they navigate these waters when employees, they're ready to bring everybody back yesterday, yet many women who are the primary caregiver for elderly as well as for their own children, not everybody's ready to have those daycares open up or those day camps. It's still limited. So, what happens there? Is there going to be any kind of allowance? So, Michelle, when you talk about, the folks that you are coaching individually, what are the concerns? Are they primarily executives that are contending with this back to the office thing? Do you have anyone that is impacted that really doesn't want to come back to the office? What are they saying?
Yeah, good question. And, as Sue had mentioned as well, my clients range in age from, early career, high potential leaders to executives that are considering retirement. And so the benefit of that client base is I hear from these many generations and all considering this through a different lens, but they're all asking themselves, are my values being honored in what I might consider doing when I go back? right? And so if it's a hybrid work environment, do I value that face-to-face contact? Do I value this time that I now have with my family? Do I value living in my, the retirement home that I purchased and didn't think I could move to until this year? And now, well, it's awfully nice here. And do I want to go back? So the whole range. They're looking at what are their options, right? So if it's stay or go, what are my options if I stay? And what might my career look like if I go? So it's opening up a lot more exploration about their career than might have happened otherwise at this moment in time, had it not been for the pandemic. And many folks, we talked earlier about, you learn things about yourself in these trying moments, right? And there's psychological health concerns and the like, but we're all thinking about, okay, what have I learned about myself in this time? And what does that mean now for me going forward? So, and it's across the gamut. I mean, it is across the generations that I'm working with, 100%.
Interesting. Thank you. Sue, I'm going to pose the same question to you, but everyone that's with us today, if you have any questions or any feedback regarding, what's going on here. Actually, one just popped through. Thank you so much, Tommy. I've heard concerns with employees who have underlying issues and immune system that could be compromised if around employees who haven't had the shot, but job requires her to be around the people. You got to wonder, what's the employer thinking? And at the same time, what's this employee to do if she's got a compromised immune system? It's just a crazy time, right? We thought last year was crazy when COVID hit. This is a crazy time that we're going through. And I don't know, Susan, or I'll go with you, Susan, to find out, do you have any feedback or can relate to the question that's been posed in the chat about? Yeah.
There's two things that I'd like to address, because something that Michelle said was, I'm working with an executive right now, exactly, and I'm a senior exec, that was able to go to his home in North Carolina versus being in Miami, where he was required to be in the office. And they had, last year, they were 35% ahead of plan. And so now the senior leaders are saying, you have to come back in. And he's like, the same thing. Why? Now, it's a career situation too, because this other CEO that I talked to is like, well, if you're not showing up, you probably won't be seen. And then therefore it will be career limiting for you, almost making it sound like a threat, right? And as Michelle said, this is across the board. It's no longer millennials driving it. It's every age group that had the opportunity. And I know when I grew up, I didn't think I had a choice. And now absolutely people are thinking we have a choice here. So this is also culture, is this acknowledgement that this is a cultural issue. And Michelle and I, when we were talking about it the other day, is are you concerned about being the leader in the kind of work environment that you are creating versus let's get back to quote unquote normal? And just because maybe your MSA may be doing one thing, maybe there's not a lot of remote work. That doesn't mean in your MSA, your metropolitan statistical area, but even if there isn't, it's moving that way generationally anyway, where people are opting out of jobs that require, particularly if they're non-customer facing jobs or non-essential jobs. But then when it comes to the employees with underlying issues, or somebody in their family having an underlying issues, or they're caretaking their son, their daughter, their parents, it's still a little bit jury out, but I'd like Michelle to speak to this. As a former COO, she contended with this a bit more. But at the same time, when I just read this, if you require your employees to be vaccinated to come back to work so that you can have a full staff, if you require it, you are liable if there are adverse impacts per OSHA. I just saw this ruling, I think 2 days ago. But then we were talking about, so what if you require people to come back? People vaccinated, they're not vaccinated, is an organization, and somebody comes in and they're asymptomatic. I mean, because you got to put all these parameters in, right? Because even if you do all this stuff that's good, if they're asymptomatic, you can't tell. What liability does the organization have? And so, Michelle, if you could speak to that.
Sure. During the pandemic, for many of employers, basically we were operating under the guidance that if you were operating in good faith with the knowledge that we had in that minute from the CDC, right? Because the guidance changed on the daily. If you were operating in good faith and doing what you could to protect your employees, you were going to be in fine shape. You as an organization would be then insulated from whatever litigation would come your way. There's definitely some challenge to that happening now. There are some pretty visible lawsuits regarding various meatpacking plants that employers are watching very closely here in the US to see what the decision is about what measures really did need to be taken and how does a court of law see that. That said, this stuff evolves daily, as well does public sentiment about masking, about testing, about vaccines. And so, from my perspective, a lot of this has to do back to that culture conversation. What is the sort of culture that you have, and how do you communicate best with your employees about what you are trying to do to keep them and everyone safe? And there will have to be some tough discussions, especially with those who are immune compromised. And frankly, it puts corporations and leaders in the crosshairs here, because basically, the American government has stepped aside and say, okay, it can be a mask-free environment. Vaccinations are not required by government mandate. And so now it's up to the employers. And that's why we're sort of in this quagmire of leaders needing to make these decisions. Yeah.
And so I wanted to jump off of that because of the culture thing. I've spent many years working with remote teams. And when I say remote, I mean geographically remote around the world, different time zones, right? And so how do you create a team? How do you create a culture when you have people in 5 different time zones and night is day and day is night? It's the same issue. It's just, it looks a little different where people are working remote, or you don't have people in the same place. So you don't have synchronistic working, particularly if you're a global organization. You have asynchronistic working, people working at different times. And if really the culture that most CEOs are concerned about is this inclusion, it's this teamwork. And Michelle, I'd like for you to talk about collision moments and the need for connection. And we know that that's important. If that's really the question, that's different than saying, when do we bring people back to work? And that's what I'm starting to ask my corporate clients to consider as I coach, like this man, he is 56 years old. So tail end of baby boomer, tail end of millennial. He doesn't know what he is, but he's like, I like working out of North Carolina. I don't want to go back to Miami in my apartment. So if you could talk about collision moments and that happiness factor study yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as a solid Gen Xer, right, I come at this world with this skepticism until you show me the data. So here's the data. There's this terrific study done by Professor Nicholas Epley in Chicago. And what he did was he was trying to study the degree to which do we understand what really makes us happy. And so if we think about a commuter line on the way to work every day, right, in Chicago and New York and San Francisco, people go and they sit in silence. And he posited that if we were to change that model and have people socialize more, he wondered, would they then be happier? So they'd conducted these experiments where their test subjects would actually go and sit next to someone and start a conversation. Now, not totally intrusive, just for a few moments, but start a conversation. And then they surveyed everyone in that train car that had participated in that part of the survey or study to determine to what degree were they happier. So commuters on this train in downtown Chicago reported that they were significantly happier It was a more positive commute when they connected with a stranger than when they sat alone. But here's the rub. When the researchers asked them, but would you have said that you would have liked to have been left alone? Those participants said, yes, I would much prefer to be just left alone. But yes, I'm happier having now sat next to the stranger. So it begs the question, like, we don't really understand the benefits of social connection. And so when we think about the value of a hybrid environment, where at least for some days that we're in, that can create those collision moments, right? And that I learned that word from the architect that helped to redesign the Mercy Housing headquarters, right? Is those moments where you run into someone and you get some quick work done, but you also build that human connection. That creates efficiencies, that creates better teamwork and collaboration and happiness, according to this research. So as we're wrestling with that question of what do we do and how do we create that culture, I think it's important for us to not necessarily go with our gut instinct here, because the data tells us that that gut is wrong, that gut drives us perhaps to isolation in ways that are unhealthy for us as humans, but that can also diminish the culture of an organization. So there's my nerdy Gen X moment for the conversation.
Well, and Cindy and I worked with a team this past year, that their sales team, right? And we had a team session scheduled for the week following when everything hit, and they were like, "No, we can't do it." And Cindy and I said, "We think you really need to do it." Right. And so we had done a survey and, that sort of thing. And, we spent, because everyone immediately, first off, they were a global team, but they were Latin American. So they were all in different countries anyway, but they had ways to connect. And there were people in the Miami office that would come in and they would be with each other, and then they'd have their meetings. And then suddenly they were all Zooming, right? And some people were in 1-bedroom apartments, and now you're sitting in my kitchen with me. And one of the things that we did the very first team session is, what were people concerned about? Our health, and then my financial livelihood. Is it going to be impacted so much that we're going to lose our jobs? And now this is the same team that ended up 35% ahead of their goal. Well, they figured out ways, because they were socially connecting, and they started out, at least in the beginning, virtual, and everybody was doing this, virtual coffee hours, Friday margaritas, that kind of thing. But what they felt is that when headquarters came in and took a look at this team, they said, what was it? They all said, even though none of them have been together in a year, and I was just talking to this leader, it was the connection that they had even through Zoom. So if that's what we're talking about with culture, these collision moments, these drive-by moments, I need that question answered, and so productivity occurs, then it's really about thinking about how much synchronistic work time do you need versus asynchronistic. I'm alone, I'm doing it, I can do it in my pajamas and get dressed from the waist up if I'm having a Zoom, right? How much asynchronistic is really going to be a value. Plus, corporate teams are also actually doing all that data. Well, what are our competitors doing? What's our community doing? But I think ultimately, you can pull all of that together. And Michelle, you said this when we had a conversation. An organization needs to decide for itself what their impact is and what do they stand for. And that's the culture. Not just, as Cindy was saying, not just necessarily saying everyone back, nobody back, and not even just saying we're going to go hybrid. What's the culture that they are trying to achieve that they then will believe will impact productivity, because that's what we're here for. And as each individual, like my friend, my client, is going through, if we have to go back 100%, I'm not going back. And now you're going to have to replace, this organization will have to replace a $600,000 person. What's the cost of that? And then you multiply it, right? So that, to me, I think it's really interesting that people are, as you said, really going on a personal level. What are my values? And I have a choice. And maybe they don't leave tomorrow, but if it's valuable enough, guess what? They'll leave.
I feel that this is all great information and thoughts and considerations, right? I feel that the horse is already out of the barn. And, in a perfect world, we're taking into, if we have leaders on this, viewing this webinar right now, hopefully you are being really purposeful about what is it that you're really trying to achieve in bringing everyone back to the office. Do you have the latitude to create a balance and create that hybrid model? Can you demonstrate that you truly trust your employees in order to allow them to continue to be productive in a way that they're comfortable, whether it's in the office or still at home? So I'd like to know, I'll go to you first, Michelle, if you don't mind. What tips or ideas or considerations are you providing your clients, whether they're executive leaders or an employee that is, trying to, climb up that ladder, that are struggling with this abrupt change? Because it's abrupt, just as quickly as COVID hit us, even though we're seeing the numbers. A lot of people were thinking, okay, I probably have until September. And all of a sudden it's like, hello, June 1st, you're back in the office. So, what should they consider when they're getting this shoved down their throats?
Yeah, I guess I would start there. I would encourage leadership to not have it be shoved down the throats of the employees, right? To whatever degree you can include organizational representation in the decision process, a committee, however you would want to structure it. But, for sure the leadership team needs to be aligned, right? To Susan's point, if you have an executive who's like, nope, I'm out, I'm staying here, there needs to be some consistency in the message from leadership and some compassion for there's been some level of trauma and certainly depression that many of us have experienced in these times. And so taking a moment, Amy Edmondson published this really terrific white paper on HBR, where she said, the importance here is whatever decision you make, if you're hybrid, if you're bringing back everyone full-time, 100% effective June 1, 3 quick tips. The first is to set the scene. Help the employees understand what they're returning to. Make it clear what the environment will look and feel like. The second is to lead the way. To that point about alignment at the top, is to role model it, reflect it, and communicate it consistently. That's where that, mind-numbing consistency of leadership communication is really important. And then lastly, take baby steps. That 100% return, that's really hard on folks. It doesn't feel safe. The earth has just shifted fully under your feet, right? And so if employers can set the scene, if they can lead the way, if they can take baby steps, then employees can really, in exploring their values, decide, does this fit for me? Is this how I want to show up for work? And I am asking my individual clients, how comfortable do you feel giving it a try first? Then see. And that's that train research, right? It's sometimes we have preconceived notions about what we think makes us happy. And sometimes we need to go give it a try before we can finally make a decision one way or the other. Unless, of course, I'm in my dream retirement house and it's in North Carolina and I'm happy as a clam. That may be an entirely different decision process.
But even what you're saying there is leaders, I'm asking you to give it a try, to try this new way, some form of hybrid, really trying to get the feedback from the employees to try to come up with a balance. But at the same time, it's also up to the employee, right? For them to give it a try, whether, if out of necessity, because, this is what's putting a roof over my head and they're saying, I got to be back in the office 40 hours a week, then I guess you got to give it a try, do what you got to do, but then make some considerations as to, You know, can I walk away? Is there a job out there for me that I can either have a hybrid model or be able to work from home? Those types of things. So Sue, I'm going to ask you the same question. So the leaders that you're coaching, how are you helping them? Like, especially this guy, right? Should I stay or should I go? That's a decision he's got to make. How are you helping him navigate those waters?
Yeah, I have to say, I've been enjoying being on the inside of both conversations, right? Having a seat at the table where senior execs are discussing these. And so I'll start there. And one of the things that I see that senior teams are not doing is they are making a decision for in the now, rather than what should the future of work look like for the next 5 or 10 years. This is an opportunity for organizations to really be strategic around what that future will look like. And given the trends, not just COVID, but the trends for the future and how workforce will change, that's something I'm seeing being missed out of the conversation. And so when I'm in those things, I'm in there as a participant, but I'm also in there as a facilitator. I'm starting to say, wait a second, think about this, because you are making a current decision rather than a strategic decision. And then don't just look, and this is another where I'm like inserting myself, don't just look at the competitors in your area, your MSA, don't just look at the other employers, because again, that is a current decision rather than a decision about where you will be and how you will be and the kind of company you want to be or organization you want to be 5 or 10 years from now. Culture is built for today, but it's also for tomorrow. So the future of work and what you do. And then the third thing is, what is it when you say, it's the culture, because they say this big word, but it's our culture. Well, what is it that you think you missed? And then therefore, what do you think you are going to gain if you bring them all back? And what I'm finding is that when they answer that question, then they're answering the back to the office question differently, right? And so at the individual level, I'm doing the same as Michelle, in that having them really take a look at their values. But a lot of our clients, Cindy, yours too, they're in very senior roles, and they are considering, if I decide that I'm going to push back that psychological safety that Michelle was talking about and saying, look, I don't want to do this. There's a psychological safety issue here. Then what does that do to my career in this organization? And so given that's a real question that, depending on the organization, I like to have my executives to really take a look at what does that mean for them, and what's the benefit and what's the cost to them. Now, another client of mine just recently said, you know what, it's not worth it, and has already left. And this again is a senior executive, between, salary and bonuses is probably $750,000 to get somebody to replace this person, and they left. Wow. That's the math that we have to consider. And again, this was not a millennial. This was, I think this person's a Gen Xer. I never asked him his age. And so, but what did he do? He went, my values, my health. I got to see my kids do things that I would have missed, and it's no longer worth the price. So as an individual, really sitting with, what are your values with that?
So actually, while you were speaking, Susan, we have a statement with a question. I wonder if companies have done the math. Are they really losing productivity with employees working from home and advanced technology, or is it trust issue? So how do you increase the trust?
Exactly. And so these are the questions, and that's why I'm glad I'm a facilitator, because guess what question I'm going to ask the team that I'm going to be with next week as they're
Right.
going through this. Is this really a trust issue? When you take a look at, and they to a degree but it's more like, yeah, I'm pretty sure productivity has been good. It's like, well, has it or hasn't it? But again, it's more than that, because yes, you want to understand that, but you also then have to understand, what kind of organization do I want to be known as? And that's part of our values as an organization. We value employee voice. Well, if we're just going blanket, June 1, July 1, whatever, then we aren't living our values. So then that's going to create another trust issue, because we're not listening to the employee voice. So these again are not easy questions. And as Michelle said before we got started, none of us have gone through this ever. And I've been in the workforce for as long as I care to admit. But none of us have seen this. And so that's why we feel very lucky that we are able to talk to so many senior executives to say, okay, you don't have to. Let's make sure that we're asking the right questions. One of the things that we like to talk about is define the real problem. And I guess that's what I'm saying. What's the real problem you're trying to solve by bringing people back to the office? And, again, when we do that, oftentimes what the answer that we've given as the solution really isn't it. So I'm aware of time. Again, if you would like for us to help you with some of these questions or some executive coaching, please reach out to us. I know Michelle, Cindy, myself, we will be happy, free of charge, to give you an hour of our time. We know your time is valuable, our time is valuable, but these are not easy questions. It's something we enjoy doing. Reach out to us at info@lcbgroup.com. Our next webinar talk, Real Talk, is going to be about the DEI fundamentals. And then after that, we are going to be in June talking about real leadership and inclusion. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate, we know we have some repeats, and very much appreciate you coming back. And remember, invite anyone that you think could gain value from some of these talks. And have a great day.
I just indicated, I apologize because we've got like 3 minutes left. I asked that if anyone is in fact interested, you can either email, like Susan said, info@lcbgroup.com, or you can just type the word yes right now in the chat, and we will follow up with you to provide that hour session just to help you navigate whatever waters you're dealing with, whether you're an executive leader or an individual that is being posed with this situation. Maybe it is being shoved down your throat and you're trying to figure out what's best for me and my family, what's best for me and my career.
Or if you're an executive,
right?
We love asking the tough questions.
Yes.
Because we all get tunnel vision. And so sometimes, unless somebody comes outside and say, do you realize, because I know with this one group I worked with, I'm like, we're being strategic. I'm like, no, you're not. And we love being able to gently, nicely, of course, but be able to go, wait a second, that the value is in exploring what we're not paying attention to. So if you would like some of that support, again, type in yes, we will get back to you. And again, have a great week. And if we have 2 more coming up in June, please feel free to join us. We'll be putting it on our LinkedIn. And Michelle, it was great to have you as always. We love our discussions with you. The other person that we've been doing some of these talks with, Tommy English, with the DEI stuff, we saw her, that she was here. So a shout out to Tommy. Tommy will be joining us for our June 10th, the fundamentals of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone.